You should have.
Okay, so welcome. I'm going to talk about one of my favorite subjects now, the impact that neuroscience is having on me, particularly in my practice of change management. I've been a change manager, not that that was my job title, for over 30 years. I started as a business analyst, so really starting to identify changes for people as I reworked their processes. Then I became a project manager, so I was delivering on perhaps tangible changes, but not touching the behavioral change side at all. I became a program manager where I was much more involved in the transition from we've got project deliverables, but how do people start to use them? How do we create business value? I ended up as global head of project and program management for several organizations. Then I headed up as a CEO for a training and consultancy company in change and program and project management. And now I not only run a training company, but also an AI company that provides online learning in this space. And everything I'm doing right now is being affected by neuroscience, an understanding of how the brain operates. And what I want to do is put forward a case for perhaps why, in terms of change management, this is where, as a profession, we should be heading. I used to head up the Change Management Institute in the UK. I did 2 tours of duty, chairing that for 6 years. I now run the Change Capability Community online, which is a global group of heads of change and transformation. And it does stagger me the number of times we end up talking about neuroscience and how the brain works. I think my argument might help understand why it's becoming such a hot topic. There isn't anything that you can do to put me off. So please, if you've got any observations, questions, or whatever, put things in the chat. And as I go through, I will routinely have a quick look in the chat and see what's going on. So don't wait for a question, just put it in there. And as soon as I can, I'll get to it. 3 parts to, well, a couple of parts to what it is I want to say. Setting the context. And then I really want to look at the basics of neuroscience, and hopefully include a few techniques in there. I've only got about 55 minutes, so I'll go quickly. Let me set the argument for why change is important. So we know that change has 2 elements. There is always going to be that tangible piece, which is creating the new thing that we want people to then start using, adopting, becoming part of their ways of working. But of course, it's on this right-hand side of the diagram, and I have put them up side by side. Ideally, they should be like that. And actually, ideally, the behavioural change stuff should start before the tangible change and can continue long afterwards. But we don't live in a perfect world. So as far as behavioural change is concerned, we know that we've got this traditional sort of transition curve where, as a human being, if you're going to give me something different to do, then I am going to go slowly at the beginning. My productivity will be lower as I'm struggling to understand what's different, remembering not to do the old stuff, making mistakes, having to put them right. And it's through practice and repetition that I will start to come out the other side. And of course, it's the right-hand side that's of particular interest to an organization, because we are doing the change for a purpose. Ultimately, it's probably because we want greater revenue or lower cost, or both. It might be that we want an improved reputation, a social standing, being an organization that is a good global citizen, perhaps. That's certainly on the top level of benefits these days. But underpinning that might well be customer satisfaction, staff engagement, regulatory compliance. So there's all sorts of reasons why we want to achieve this behavior change. There's lots of benefits. So if we have the sort of tangible changes on the left, what interests me is that the new ways of working, they're so involved. When you start to unpick them, as we know as change experts, you pull at one thread and everything starts to unravel. If I've got a new process, then I might be changing somebody's role, which means I might be changing their reporting line. But then maybe they need new competencies. If we're changing the processes, we maybe need new standards and policies, which might mean that they have to do things differently. Oh, what about new priorities? What about new metrics, KPIs, OKRs? Oh, how about how we do talent acquisition and onboarding of new staff? You know what it's like. That's what makes our job so rich and exciting, actually, is you make one change and there's so much to deal with. And of course, there's the emotions of people. People are feeling angry, they're feeling confused, they don't know which direction to go in, maybe they need to build new relationships, maybe they feel like they're juggling all the balls at once. So effectively, it's this whole piece that we have to get across to people and get people involved in. And what I would say is that the current models, I don't think I've even put ADCAR up here, but Cotter, here is Kubler-Ross's well-known grief curve. There's the competency model, Gestalt competency model. There's William Bridges. I could have put ADCAR in the middle there. Those are all great models. They all bring something to the table. I think they all help to characterize the emotional and psychological impact of change. But after 30 years, I'm finding them less helpful. And the reason I'm finding them less helpful, very simply, is because they deal with change as if it were an individual change that we're taking people through. And that's not our experience anymore. I made a note yesterday, which is just shocks me, which is I am going through 17 changes in my own 2 companies at the moment. Well, I'm experiencing them, but I'm also leading different people through groups of different changes. Sometimes they're part of a program of interrelated change, and other times they're just coming left field. This doesn't surprise me when I look at some of the data. I run the global survey every year, the Global Capability for Change survey. And just under 2 years ago, we had the results, which were all of our respondents were saying, whatever industry, whatever place in the world they were in, that about 4 out of 10 of them felt that the level of change within their organization was manageable. Last year, that fell to 20%. So that's a massive warning bell. I'm certainly seeing this across all of my clients around the world. I work for big organizations like Toyota and British Airways. I work for governments in various parts of the world. I work for places like the United Nations. I also work for small charities and private sector organizations. And they all seem to have one thing in common, which is nobody's got the time for change. And if you look at the number of you who've managed to get onto this call at lunchtime and you're squeezing it in, and the number of people who registered and didn't turn up, it's not because they're no longer interested in the subject that they originally registered for, it's just that other priorities have squeezed them out. So at the end of the day, we know that we're overwhelmed. EY did a global survey they published, I think, a couple of months ago now, which has basically said that CEOs that they surveyed are saying 57% of them are saying that they're going to increase the amount of transformation they're doing within their organizations this year. 37% said that they would maintain the current level of transformation, and only a few percent said it was staying the same or reducing it. And I think, good grief, but we've just seen that only 2 out of 10 organizations think they can cope with the level of change that they've got. Gartner published a survey in December that said that they compared some data that they'd got in 2018, which was around the number of organization-wide, enterprise-wide change initiatives that an individual was involved in. And in 2018, it was 2. In December of 2023, it was 10. So there's been a 5-fold increase in only about 6-7 years. So again, it's the volume of change that people are experiencing that I think is putting pressure on some of those models to be as useful as they are, because they kind of imply that people are focusing on my change and only my change because there's no other change going on. This is a messy diagram, and it kind of sums up what I've been trying to do this afternoon for my own teams, which is recognize all the different changes that are taking place and then try to almost orientate people. Try to draw a line through where we are right now and say, well, look, these are all the things we've achieved, the decisions we've taken, the moves we've made, the things that are now happening, the things that we've discarded. Just basically trying to say, look, catch your breath. This is where we've got to. This is what's coming up next. So we're trying to make that sort of orientation. I was working with some special forces a few months ago, and one of the things we talked about is the first thing that they do when they are parachuted into a new situation is they don't start firing at people. They actually try to work out where it is they are. Their parachutes indicated that they should be landing at a certain place, but was that exactly where they landed? So they take that lie of the land. if you like, they create the baseline from which they are now going to take action. And I think increasingly that has become a valuable skill. And it's getting harder and harder to do it, but very important. So for me, that's the first reason why some of these more traditional models aren't working. The second one, and as I said, I've got over 30 years, so I can look back at all of this through that lens. And I look at the stakeholder identification and analysis models that exist. And I think, well, it is helpful sometimes to understand my stakeholders as, are they providers or suppliers? Are they customers? Are they maybe in a decision-making forum? You know, maybe they're the sponsor, maybe a regulatory body or the internal compliance department. The problem is that I end up messaging them based on those sort of job titles and their supposed responsibilities, and the messages just bounce right off. It just doesn't connect. And actually, with the level of change going on right now, that's very dangerous. I need my messages to land first time for two reasons. One, I am overwhelmed by my workload. So if I have to keep repeating myself, where am I supposed to find the time for this? And the second thing is the people that I am trying to communicate with, if the message doesn't land the first time, I just become noise in their inbox and they're more likely to ignore me. And just as I have to keep nagging, actually there's a diminishing returns there, because the more emails I send, the less likely they are to open them. So I really care about making sure that my messages land. Another way of looking at things, I can slice and dice my stakeholders based on various perceptions. My perception of how interested they are in the change. Maybe in this case, I've just used the diagram of power versus influence, but equally I could have done interest versus impact. I could have done impact versus readiness. All of these are nice ideas. They're all helpful, but they don't necessarily connect. Yeah, it helps me curate some of my information, but it doesn't necessarily connect. What I'm looking for, you know, the logical argument will always be with us, but too often it just bounces right off. You know, I've made a logical, reasoned argument. I haven't captured anybody's attention. I haven't captured their emotions. They don't see it as relevant. They don't even open it. It's gone. Similarly, I try to tell engaging stories. I use all of the storytelling techniques that we have in corporate storytelling. I use things like setting out a challenge, making sure that we've got a very happy ending to, you know, we've had a success towards the end, we've overcome the big challenge. I also use people, place and time to make sure that when I was in the canteen last week with Jill, she said, I use all those tricks, but again, the engaging stories often bounce off. What I do, therefore, is I need to think about, actually, maybe it's brain-friendly messages. And maybe those brain-friendly messages aren't based on my analysis of stakeholders. It's just recognizing that everybody has a brain and everybody's brain is going to be triggered by these very similar points. Our brains like to avoid pain. They like to maximize pleasure. We like autonomy. We like to be in charge of our own destiny. Not because, you know, we're self-aggrandizing, but simply the brain says, you know, nobody will be as interested in my survival as I am. And therefore, the more I am in control of my own destiny, the more likely I am to survive. We want certainty. Nobody likes uncertainty. You don't walk into a very dark tunnel without having a torch, so you can try to create a picture of certainty. I know exactly where my foot is going to land in the next step. We just don't walk through the dark. We like certainty. So it's these very core messages. It's visceral. This is the sort of the jumping off point that actually connects with people, as well as energy, a perception of energy. If this looks like it's very big energy, our brains are going to go, no, let's not do that. Because, well, Our brains are about 3% of our body weight, depending on how many M&Ms I ate this afternoon, but about 20% of our oxygen usage. So our brains are like, they 4K televisions. When you're watching Netflix on a Saturday afternoon, you've been binge watching something. Bridgerton, here I come. For hours, the television will come up after 3 hours and go, "Are you still watching?" I always take that as a sort of hint that I'm being really lazy when my television is checking in with me. But it's because the television is worried about overheating and wants to sort of go on to standby mode. Our brains aren't that dissimilar. Our brains are looking for, how can I minimize the energy of what's required here? And bearing in mind that the overload that people experience, we've got a question in the chat, which is about what's the overall amount of change. There's no easy answer to that. Everybody at different levels within an organization. You could argue that 95% of a CEO's job is change, 5% of a junior administrator's job is change. Whatever the percentage is, I think what everybody's finding is that actually their business as usual role is already more than 100% of their available time and energy. And that's why so many people in so many organizations, particularly knowledge organizations, they come in early. How many of you today, for example, came in early? Look, you're all giving up your lunchtime for career development. How many of you will stay late? Some of the data I see is that on a Saturday morning, for example, I will be working on LinkedIn. I will see loads of queries and inquiries come in. People email me on a Saturday morning because they're just trying to finish off their working week. And similarly, it all goes quiet after about lunchtime, but then again, Sunday evening, you start to see a huge number of people coming back in, because people are my informal survey over the last decade is that particularly in our knowledge workers, we see about a commitment of about 130% of their contract hours. So over here in Europe, you'll see contract hours of 35, 37.5 or 40 hours per week. But actually people are doing a lot more than that. So it doesn't matter what the proportion of change is. If people are already overstuffed in terms of business as usual, they don't have any headspace for change. Spend a lot of time with senior leaders trying to get that message across. And saying the first change in any change is, how do you strip down business as usual to create space for change? So I think that's probably one of the key things. Thumbs up if you think I'm making sense so far, if everybody's happy with what I'm saying. I'm about to take a leap into leadership. Yeah. Okay, useful. Yeah, if at any time I'm being boring, don't be afraid to put it in the chat and tell me, and I will try to add more relevant details. So feel free to help direct what I'm saying. Last thing, this is more for senior leaders, but I wanted to share it with you because I find it's very impactful. Talking about why engaging with people and actually trying to get brain friendly messages and trying to really connect is worthwhile, even at the senior leader, the sponsor level. The first thing I do is make sure that my senior leaders are aware that change is more than just the achievement of the business case. It is not enough to deliver the tangible change on time, on budget, to the required quality. Nor is it enough to say, well, everybody's been trained in the new ways of working and now, they're expected to work that way. The achievement of, yes, we've shifted how we do things around here. Everybody's on the new system is to be applauded, absolutely, but it's not enough. My senior leaders also have to keep an eye on, at the same time, what's the experience that people are having of change? Because we all know you can ram a change through, but people found it such a dispiriting thing that either their support for another change will be minimal, or they will go because they hated it so much. The alternative is also true. If we work in a brain-friendly way, what we can do is we can help people create optimism and engagement. They really feel, I was part of this. I'm proud of this. This has really worked. This was great. I've learned new skills. So confidence goes up, empowerment goes up, and all of that taken together delivers on something that is a competitive advantage, a massive competitive advantage. in the scheme of the huge volume of changes that we are seeing, which is it helps them build organizational capability for change. What's happened is that this change that a senior leader helped sponsor, because they focused on the experience as well as the achievement, has actually created a more positive environment for the next change. Based on what we've just said about volume of changes, they don't have to look very far before the next one is knocking on their door. So there is multiple change, multiple continuous change. Why wouldn't you want to build an overarching capability, an internal ability to cope with and in fact thrive during change? So I often talk to my senior leaders about the fact that the achievement of change is very much about changing how people work. So you've got to engage them with how they work, train them, mentor them, coach them, redo all of the processes, policies, standards, metrics, you name it. The experience is you have to help people navigate change. You have to train them in how to change. And certainly the group that I chair, the Change Capability Community, over the last few years, we've been doing a lot of work on what is the role of us in change management. Because I think that the key role is that we are now coaching that capability in the organization. Whereas before, I mean, I've spent sort of 25 years or so, I've got every sort of change management framework toolkit that you could ever wish for. I'd still build, I build a very agile toolkit for all of my clients. I have a massive amount of neuro hacks, short techniques that form the basis of their dynamic toolkit. But actually, that's a part of a wider role. My role has shifted to being sort of chief coach and cheerleader for building that capability. So how do we get people to change? And the point is, if we fail to do this, then the alternative is that we generate poor experience. So people will ignore future changes, or they will go very slowly through changes. There'll be a lot less progress, which means, the vicious circle of less progress means that there's less motivation. And we need motivation. It leads to a very poor experience. And it's that vicious circle of the poor experience means that they ignore the next change, slow change, less progress, low motivation. You get the joke. So I think understanding how the brain works and putting on the agenda, yeah, we can do something about that, is absolutely critical. So that's my summary of the context in which I have come to the world of neuroscience over the last 6 to 8 years. And certainly that need for it has accelerated greatly over the last couple of years. I'm finding it far more impactful, and I'm about to sort of show you what I mean by neuroscience and give you some examples of some techniques. Any questions about the context, any observations, anything that anybody wants to share? Just unmute yourself and sort of throw a comment in. I'm very happy to have a discourse. Or throw your cameras on. I can only see blank screens, so I'm thinking, where are you? Happy with the context? Tell me, talk to me, give me some feedback. I need something back. Thank you, Elizabeth. Oh, look, that's really good. That's all I needed. As long as I'm making sense. Remember, I worked for you this afternoon. So yeah, there we go. Thank you, Jackie. Yeah. It's the age-old thing, isn't it? And you're about to see what you're doing right now. I will describe what your thumbs up are doing to my brain. Okay, so why don't I tell you about what's happening in my brain? Let's just see if I've got another. Oh, and Laura says it's great in the chat. So there we go. So let me describe what's happening. Basically, this diagram is one that I draw hundreds of times a year. And it's because what I'm finding now is irrespective of your job title, irrespective of your views about the change, your role in the change, what the type of change is. So all of that stuff, your brain will still react the same way. The brain will start with it's the threat response. And the threat response to any change is it's anxiety inducing. It doesn't matter if the change is good or bad. It doesn't matter if you were the originator of the change or it's being done to you. You will still suffer levels of anxiety and stress. What's happening in your brain And I'm going to give an example of one that's happening to me right now. And I'm doing this to myself. My company are moving offices at the end of next week. And it's for good reasons. We think that the current offices are too noisy, too hot. The commute has got longer. Post-COVID, we've seen that the commute has added another sort of 10 minutes. So that doesn't sound much, but that's another 20 minutes out of the day. So people are commuting more than an hour, sometimes an hour and up to 2 hours to get to the office, which in a hybrid world, that doesn't stack up very well. It's a very expensive office, and increasingly the noise levels are making it very difficult to work there. We've got new offices where we have loads of space. We'll be able to bring our dogs to work if we want to. We have great facilities there. There's loads of easy parking. It's a much cheaper place that we're going to. So we're really excited. However, when I think about the new office, I woke up this morning and felt a little bit sick. Why? Why did I have that physical reaction? Well, actually, what's happening is that I think about all the things that need to happen to make the change happen, and the adrenaline starts to go up. I'm never going to get this done by the end of next week. So the adrenaline, think of adrenaline as the drum beat. It's there. That's what we feel when we're working to a deadline. Actually, that's adrenaline. That's what's working towards your deadline in your brain. The other thing that's always interesting is noradrenaline. I think in the States we call it epinephrine. It is a chemical in the brain that makes us focus in on the immediate threat, and everything else gets closed out. And this is really interesting from a change perspective, because when you start to focus in on the current change, the problem, the challenge, what happens is your brain is thinking about that, and it closes out a willingness to listen to different voices, to hear different solutions, to bring in other information. We become very inflexible. We become very defensive. We push people away, push other solutions away. I've got it, I'm fine, tends to be the reaction when we're using epinephrine. And it's ironic, isn't it? At the time when we actually need more innovation, more creative thinking, i.e. pulling in different sources and knitting all the points together, our brains are going the other way and going, no, leave me alone, shut up, I don't want to hear anything else. So we close out the opportunity for solutions at the moment that we need them. And that is what happens with your brain. Yeah. So always aware that when you're under threat, I've had a very unusual life. And I, amongst other things, I've been bombed out 3 times. I've been run over 4 times, bit of a bad experience with Al Qaeda in sort of northern Pakistan. And I remember with all the guns and thinking that I was about to be kidnapped, which was, pretty good possibility. We were very lucky to have survived that one. I remember, I remember everything that was in the car. I remember everything about the people, the smells, everything about in the car. But I have a very vague understanding of what was happening outside, because my brain was just focusing in on that situation right then. I probably couldn't have told you my own name because I was so stressed, because my brain is closing down, closing down, closing down. And that's what happens in crisis situations. That's why we need first responders to really be quite specific in their instructions, because the people they're dealing with, their brains have focused in on the problem. They can't see anything wider than that. Always really interesting. Always makes me laugh, because I know some of the things I should be doing when I'm under crisis. And it's about, and this is what I'm going to show you now, is that what you need to be able to take yourself out of threat is instead create these far more pleasurable chemicals. So what I need is a sense of achievement. For every achievement, I get something called dopamine. And dopamine is the chemical that it gives us energy. It gives us a sense of, oh, good, that was great. It's every time something good happens, every time we have a little achievement, it doesn't have to be good. It just needs to be, oh, I've got that done. I've got that done. So every time you cross something off a to-do list, you are creating dopamine. It's very addictive. It's more addictive than heroin. Our brains crave that feeling of, oh, I'm making progress. I'm getting stuff done. This is a problem with our kids these days, because every time we get a like in or reshare in social media, it creates that dopamine piece. So even something as silly as somebody sharing another photo of us, that kicks off dopamine. And in fact, the brain craves more of it, and it becomes that cycle where actually the brain is not prepared to wait. It's not prepared to invest in something to get that dopamine. It wants it immediately, and it wants it now. So we head more towards addiction, I think, than we ever have before. But certainly dopamine, every time, if I want to calm myself, and I remember when I was, the kidnapping issue, I remember I tidied my handbag. I couldn't do much else, but I tidied my handbag because I thought, well, if I'm going to be executed, I don't want to be executed with loads of chocolate wrappers in my handbag. And it's that kind of thing. With The Office, I know that the way to calm that feeling of, oh, woke up feeling sick and stressed, have an achievement then. So I wrote down a list of things I needed to decide. I made decisions, I sent emails, and for every single email, every little decision I took, even something as stupid as signing off on the office chairs, nothing amazing, but it was an achievement, and my brain created dopamine. So that was really good. The other thing that I did to stop myself feeling sick is that I wanted to create this feeling of oxytocin. So I got hold of a close colleague. Oxytocin, the bonding chemical, is a very pleasurable chemical. I feel part of the tribe. I don't feel alone anymore, which is less threatening. Very much goes back to our ancient brains, because the only way that we survived, and if you like Simon Sinek's work, he speaks well on this subject, but the only way we can survive is if members of our tribe went out and got food, or we could sleep through the night because other members of the tribe were keeping guard. So there's a very deep-seated reason why bonding, being part of a group like us. So if you want to create that feeling very quickly, get hold of a close colleague, a close friend. You can also create that feeling. This is what we're doing now. When you put your thumbs up, you're creating dopamine because it's telling me, Mel, you are achieving, you're hitting your mark, you are making key points. But also the fact that when Elizabeth went onto camera just a moment ago, what happened in my brain was that my brain went, that's a fellow human being. That's a fellow human being on this session. And she was clapping. So that was dopamine. She's on my side. So we've got something in common. She's interested. But it was because I saw Elizabeth's face. For you not being on camera, that makes it more difficult. There are experiments that show, and which parents are doing this, I do not know, but parents of newborns handing them over to neuroscientists who are showing the newborns images, sparkly things, brightly colored things, neon colored things, and pictures of human beings. Human faces are the thing that a newborn orientates towards. There is a lot of research out there that shows that we get that oxytocin. It doesn't have to be active. I can see Robin's got her picture up here, whereas the rest of these boxes are black for me. So Robin, I've got a bit more of a connection with because I can see her smiling face. And when I look at Robin's picture, my brain can't help it. It smiles back. If you are trying to communicate with a group of people that you will never meet, which is the joys of hybrid working, and it's really difficult to build those relationships, what I do is I take their photos off of LinkedIn. I just build myself a little slide and I print it out in color. Color helps. And it's there. Visual helps. And it's just there over there. I've got a little stand for it. So when I'm writing emails, and there's research to show this has quite an effect. When I'm writing emails, because I'm looking at them, I'm looking at their pictures, I'm feeling that oxytocin. Therefore, I feel bonded to them. I feel part of their tribe. I feel trusting. I really feel there's some trust between us. The language in my emails, even though I don't notice it, it softens. It's more engaging. It's more empathetic. It's not something I can easily create from a very theoretical point of view. It naturally happens because I'm looking at their faces. So that's worth thinking about when you're building that oxytocin up. And of course, endorphins, we talk about endorphins as the pleasure chemicals, but actually more than anything, they help reduce pain. My husband knows I'm really stressed at the moment with the office move, and we've got a whole load of building work going on in our house. And he came to show me today a text message which says, the builders who are doing some problems over down the bottom of the garden are going to be here tomorrow at 8:30 to fit everything. And it was that little bit that made me think, there was a bit of, it wasn't pleasure so much as it reduced some of my pain, and therefore it pushes me more towards that reward piece. And personally, what I find is that understanding this very simple diagram, and on the Neuroscience for Change course, oh, I do so much more on this, and it's brilliant. It's so helpful. But this is the core understanding. And there are models in this world to help us with this. The Neuroscience for Change course, I work with a neuroscientist called Tibby, and she owns the Pepe model, which is about pain, energy, peaks and valleys, and error. And also, if you know David Rock's work, she's in the same community as David, because the Association for Neuroscience in Education, the A&E, they're both in that. And David Rock's work, the SCARF model, you might have heard of. Both these models have something in common. What they are doing is that in different ways, they've pulled out the key sort of triggers within the brain, that if you trigger those things, you get the visceral response that you're looking for, that the brain cannot help. It's a bit like me looking at the picture of Robin and smiling. You know, you can't overwrite it. It's hard coded in the brain. So what both of these models are saying is, if you understand that coding, you can base your communications on it and you will get the results that you're looking for. Still happy? Still making sense? Any observations on threat versus reward? Is it going to change what you do? You're going to be thinking a bit more about the reward stuff. I'll give you an example. I went to a concert last night. Oh, yeah, like that. Good. I'm hearing a voice as well. That makes me happy. Last night, my husband drove 2.5 hours. We went to a Tom Jones concert. He's 84 years old. I'm very keen to see performers before they die. So what made me go to an evening with Joan Collins once, because I thought she's in her 80s as well. Anyway, so drove 2.5 hours across southern Spain to go to Sevilla from my home in Malaga. And the first hour of that, he's an angel, because the first hour of that car ride, I was sat with my phone and I was sending out meaningful, authentic, grateful messaging to people, calling out in the moment great things that they'd done yesterday, because I wanted people to be able to step up into today, which I knew was going to be a tough day for some of them, feeling that feeling of reward, that I wanted to create all of the positive chemicals. So you don't have to wait for big stuff to happen. You know, you can get in the way in which it shapes how you do things. I know that what I did yesterday was I changed the way people's brains were regarding today's work just by putting those messages out there. So I spend in the moment, I do an awful lot more thanking and acknowledging than I ever have before. And very selfishly, it's because I'm building the energy for yet more work, more productive work. It's not just, being touchy-feely and nice. And I say that to a lot of my senior leaders, and they get it. And they go, okay, I sort of said, it's no good holding on to, you've got something really valuable to thank people for. Forget it. You've got to thank them in the moment for tiny little pieces, because that tiny little piece will create a positive brain response. And that is what you're looking for. So don't wait for Marcus Buckingham wrote that HBR article. I didn't enjoy his book that much, but it's about loving what you do. But the Mayo research that underpins it, it's basically saying, if you want to have a great day at work, 20% of your day has to be brilliant, has to be doing things you really love, you're really engaged with, intrinsically motivated towards, or as Maslow would have said, I'm self-actualizing for 20% of the day. You can't save it all up and have a brilliant Friday. You've got to have a brilliant Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. Knowing that research and understanding how my brain works, it's no good having a fantastically populated dopamine heavy Friday. I've got to have dopamine, I've got to have endorphins, I've got to have oxytocin every day. I was doing something truly horrible a few weeks ago, and I had 7 hours each day of back-to-back meetings with people who really didn't like me or themselves. And so I got up before dawn, and you might think, good grief, why go into the office so early on days when you're going to have a horrible day? But what I did, using the brain science, was I gave myself a couple of hours, around about 20% mark, funnily enough, of my own work, the stuff that really motivates me. I was doing stuff under my own direction, not being directed by others for the other 7 hours. And that is what is so motivating. So thinking about how we motivate ourselves as well as motivate others is important. I'm going to use the rest of this to go through a few techniques. And the first one that I'm thinking about is I want to minimize the brain sort of going, no, stop, it's not safe to proceed. If I want to talk about particular change, the best thing I can do is convince the brain that nothing to see here, this is not an issue, there's no threat, this change, it completely aligns with everything else you're doing. In other words, I want to create a very, very smooth flow. So what I can do is I can recognize the things that people are currently in the middle of and the things that they've currently landed. And if I'm really good, the things that are going to be coming up next. And what I can do is I can say, well, actually, key message, the change I want to talk about makes use of the things that you've currently landed or in progress. It builds upon, it adds, in fact, it enhances. So it makes use of and it adds to what you've already been doing. And if I'm really good, I might also say that the change is building a positive foundation for other changes that they may have heard about, rumors that they may have heard about, things that are coming up soon. Because if at any point my brain, which loves certainty, thinks, ooh, she wants to talk about this change here, where's this come from? What's this all about? You know, as soon as my brain thinks, oh, that's going off at a tangent, my brain will stop and go, this is threatening. Best thing to do is ignore it. Don't like this. Whereas if I say, well, no, this is not a change, really. It's just an extension of, or it's the building the foundations for something. And my brain's going, oh, okay, no decision needed then. It's all flowing together. Okay, we'll carry on. It's understanding how the brain works that's so useful. Here's another one. The dilution effect of the brain. That's always a really interesting one. Our brains are fair. It's one of the things. Our brains basically say, well, if there's 5 pieces of information, I'll give 20% of my time to each of them. Our brains immediately sort of allocate sort of processing power across whatever's going on. So the ironic thing often with change is that I'm so busy trying to identify and motivate you with all the possible benefits, you know, that I've identified all of these benefits. So I want to get them across to you. I want to tell you everything that's great about this. So problem is you might be a senior leader or maybe you're an administrator just trying to get the job done. I would be far better off saying to the senior leader, talking about benefits number 3 and number 5, which are relevant to their strategic role. I can signpost the other benefits if I want to, but I want their brains giving 50% each to each of those and really focusing in on and engaging with those things. For the administrator, maybe just one benefit is relevant and talk about that and that thing they will retain. But otherwise, they're trying to spread. And the thing is, the brain cannot help it because the brain does not know which piece of information are really the most valuable and which are least valuable. It sees 9 pieces of information. It's going to spread itself across 9 pieces of information. I can tell you now that understanding this part of neuroscience has radically changed how I also deal with things like my builders, because I do not try to get them to spread their attention across every single thing. Tomorrow morning, the builders are going to arrive and there is a big problem down there in the bottom of my garden. That is what I'll talk about. Now, they're going to be coming back to do other parts of this house, but that is not the thing I'm going to talk about tomorrow because they have 1 working day left of the week. That is what I want them focusing in on and understanding how the brain works. You might think you're being chatty. You might think you're being informative. You might think you're being open and transparent. And if openness and transparency is a concern, absolutely signpost people to more information. Still keep your conversation focused if you want people to take action, because otherwise the brain will just dilute it, will just spread across. What this does for my emails in a more information age rather than my builders and the failing garden is that I will write an email. I did one today where I just sat there and I wrote out everything that I was thinking about and I printed it out, got a pen, and then I worked out actually paragraphs 1 and 7 are really useful for that group. Paragraphs 1, 3, and 5 are really useful for that group. And I actually started to curate what I was saying based on what people needed to know. I also recognized that in my brain, it was all the same thing. It was all one big change. So I got it out there. I just typed and got it all done. And then I was able to do the analysis. And I think this willingness to curate things in a world of very high volume, continuous change is something we can really bring to the party. And it's something that I coach my very senior leaders to do as well, because people want, as we said earlier on with the orientation piece, this is what we've achieved so far. This is what we've got coming up in the next week. As far as the brain is concerned, the processing power needed to process large volumes of information, whether it's too many benefits as on here, or similarly, this is a good argument for agile. If I only give you a small amount, and I'm going to put an agile plan up now, if I break my change into, and I've used the word iterations, I could use increments, I could use sprints, I could use tranches, stages, waves, phases, whatever it is. But if I chunk things up, I'm going to now focus you in on the outcome required for iteration 1. I can talk about the ultimate vision and then just bring your attention back to the outcome for iteration 1. I can show a little visual of the outcomes for iterations 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever. But I just want to talk to you about the vision, will give you some context, and then the outcome for iteration 1. Otherwise, I'm asking your brain to actually spread all of its attention across iterations 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And the amount of processing power required for that is huge. And the amount of detail that will be lost as your brain's filtering out things just to try to grip onto the outcomes for all the iterations, it's lost all the detail about what's required to achieve iteration 1. I have shot myself in the foot because I have overloaded the brain. I didn't need to. I do a whole webinar on why agile ways of working is so brain smart, because the neuroscience tells us that an agile approach is really clever. But that isn't what I wanted to say. The last thing I wanted to finish on was how understanding neuroscience, I think, has really changed my sort of approach in terms of planning and organizing things. Because what I do now is I build in periods of reflection, whatever you want to call those. But what I understand the brain needs, effectively, our brains, like they're on a treadmill, and it just keeps going faster and faster. Now, we couldn't do that forever, could we? We need rest periods. And that's exactly what the brain needs. So you gear everybody up for a really busy week or a really busy day. In my company, we had a terrific week last week because we flew everybody in from all over the world here to Malaga and did a big, big event. This week, right, so Friday, everybody left. And one of the things we focused in on, my colleagues and I, on Friday and on Saturday morning, when we were doing a sort of wash up, was just that reflection and the resetting of our baseline based on all the things that we'd heard and done. So that we were, and this is the business value of it, we squeezed as much as we could out of what we'd learned from our colleagues by talking about it, reflecting on it, before we then moved on. And building that time in. This week has been a terrifically busy week, and tomorrow is a day of reflection and squeezing more value out of the decisions. And I've got a big piece of magic whiteboard over there where I'm writing down all the things we've achieved this week, decisions that have been taken. We're doing some amazingly big stuff in our company at the moment. So I'm just capturing all of those achievements, and I will start the day with everybody saying, this is where we've got to, and really thanking everybody as well, but also asking them to say, what's your favourite bit? What's the thing you learned the most? What are you most proud of? I'll ask very positive questions. I will construct a reflection session. It's reflecting, resetting. And what I say to my senior leaders is the reason you'll get so much value out of that, you'll squeeze the value out of whatever achievements you've had so far, is because in talking about them, so it has to be collaborative, in talking about what you're most proud of, what you're most excited about, what you learned the most out of, what you gained from doing these things, how you think this will take us forward, all of those pieces of information being shared across the group, it helps people have new insights. I guarantee that when my team do that tomorrow, they will have insights. They go, but we could use this also for this project. they will find some insights that will be brilliant and get even more value out of what we've achieved so far. That is what happens. So that's why periods of reflection and resetting. And as I said to a client this afternoon, it's not lessons learned. Lessons learned mean you need to learn your lesson. It didn't go as well. You need to learn this for the future. It's an incredibly negative thing. As soon as you understand how the brain thinks, because when you're negative, the brain is going, I'm being threatened. I'm being told I'm not good enough. And suddenly you've started that whole adrenaline, noradrenaline, cortisol cycle again. And you've wiped out all of the oxytocin, the dopamine, and the endorphins. Don't do it. Go for the positive. That's the key thing that you're looking for. And this stuff is so useful, as I have got so many changes on that I have got to make happen. And what I use is the Neuroscience for Change course. It's a couple of days where never run it the same way twice, because the questions are so amazing and everybody goes away with their own new insights. Absolutely brilliant. And the other thing is that the Agile Change Coach, how do we coach people through the life of a change, being more persuasive, more engaging? I've actually put 41 neurohacks, brain shortcuts in there based on neuroscience. And it's such a big menu that you get that opportunity to go, some of these I like, some of these will work. That would work for one client, that wouldn't work for another. And it's just having that menu of techniques, some of which I've shared today, but I've got hundreds of them, that I think makes a real difference. So I hope I've convinced you that neuroscience is absolutely valuable for our change practice. I am committed to building the change management profession of the future. I think we are such a valuable, business valuable profession. I don't think we've won that argument, actually. I don't think enough senior leaders see change management as essential as it is. And I continue to battle that in every boardroom that I am in. Hopefully I gave you a bit of an insight of that today. And if you like what I'm doing, come and join me. I just want to be inspired by other people. And the more that we know about these things, the better, I think. Thank you. I can see my oxytocin going up with every little icon that appears. Any other questions? Anything that I didn't get to in the chat? Let's have a little look. Very positive messages, so thank you. That's lovely. Particularly as I'm going into another session straight after this one, so that will inspire me a bit more. Yes, Tom Jones was brilliant. He may be 84, but my God, he still got it. He's got amazing showmanship. It's always lovely to see a genius at work, and this person really knows their stuff. So I must admit, I do enjoy going to things that are full of excellence, and he definitely was a proponent of that last night. Links included in the deck.
We'll make sure they get
yes. I'm going to send the deck straight out to you, actually. So I've got no issues with that. But yes, you find me on LinkedIn as well. And I will join you to the change capability community with lots of resources as well. But I would love to take this forward. I just think we're just at the starting point of how neuroscience will change how we work. And I think personally, we need to get a lot brain smarter, doing a hell of a lot of AI this morning. And there's artificial intelligence. If we don't build our own human intelligence, maybe we are screwed. So something to think about. Okay. Thank you very much for that. I'll stop recording now. It's been a pleasure. Thanks for asking me. It's great.